Okay, hi everyone. We are back looking at some Wolfram language design, and our subject is metadata in trees. And this has to do with how we should store. In the case of, well, we saw this a bit in the file system case, but now we're seeing it in more detail in the abstract syntax tree case and the XML case. Am I correct here?
Yep.
We don't have a representative here. So Brenton, with his abstract syntax trees is not represented here. Is that right?
I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. Is one of your abstract syntax trees also here? Or are you here on your own without your tree?
You can create a tree.
Yeah,
Okay.
that where it says container node, call node, leaf node, those are examples of what code parser gives.
I thought there was also a point, though, that this is not a totally faithful representation because the code parser also has stuff about parent trees or something like that.
Well,
let's
that,
not
like, kind of
get
like
into, anything to do with the
syntax.
data structures.
All right, let's take a look down this list of our examples of trees with metadata. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing we have is XML.
So these are all sections you can open with examples.
Okay. God, these are hard to read. Can I turn this into a tree?
Yeah, that there's a matching subsection in the next that shows how it's converted into a tree.
Okay.
Maybe there's an argument that XML element should format to look like XML or something.
That's a very good point. Why not? Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Text element does that, so.
To look like so
something
if I take
that,
a text
here I'm
element,
showing the full
That's
form.
a full
but,
form. Yeah.
Yeah, but if I take text element. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, good point. Okay, so.
Well, so relatedly, if we're talking about formatting real quick.
Sorry to interrupt. I was muted and wondering why everybody was ignoring me. I would argue that it's much more important to see the full form for an XML object than it is for text element, because people do a lot of pattern matching against XML trees, which I don't think is necessarily the case of text element. Maybe I'm wrong, but.
Sorry. You're saying you think it's important to see the structure so people know how to pattern match against it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah.
But you can have a mouse over that shows that. It's just unfrigging readable otherwise.
And
it should at least format somehow.
And also, I
manipulation.
kind of think that we expect to have, new transformation rules, new pattern matching compared to the old XML tree, which relied on sort of legacy pattern matching.
You mean
Exactly.
specialized tree-based pattern matching?
Yeah, tree transformations.
Yeah.
So XPath to say where and XSLT to say what, that kind of thing, I mean, not exactly,
Yeah.
but inspired.
Well, right, but I mean, like we have regular expression.
Yes.
We're doing standard regex type stuff. I mean, it is, and we have smiles for dealing with chemicals and so on. These are nice compact notations, and there's no reason not to use them. Actually, I don't know how compact the notations are.
I think the thing with XML, though, is that, every single time I've ever used XML element, I've always just done a big cases at level infinity around it. Partly because there hasn't been any better way to do it. Maybe with trees,
exactly, Christopher. But you're also, I think that level of transformation is accessible to not a wide group of people. It's not super easy.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's just do a survey here. So, so we've got XML elements. We've got, I think this is what we asked for in the last meeting. It's just an inventory of the types of trees with things hanging off them that we've got.
So these are the cases that we don't have nice representations, because these are the cases where you have data and somehow metadata, and I'm using rules and lists and associations, and we want kind of a more
Sorry, who's using? I mean, But you mean when you turn these into your trees?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But I mean, so what's happening here is, let's just survey what's happening here. So XML is a payload and then it's subtrees. Is that right?
Yep.
And oh, for goodness sake, text element is the other way around. No, that's attributes. Text element has only subtrees because its leaves are. No, wait a minute. You've written this the wrong way around.
I think XML is that too. Basically, it's a tag because the element has.
I'm sorry. Did you
names.
write this correctly?
Yeah.
Oh, it's subtrees until you get to the leaf node, where that subtrees is replaced by a string.
Yeah. Some of these you don't always have to have a list around a singleton.
Right. This, I guess, the subtree is just a string.
But isn't XML the same thing?
Well, XML is kind of the other way around, but it's just because it has a tag also.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Its argument order is opposite.
Right.
I mean, here's a question that we might ask for some of these things. You know, do we think we might change the XML structure to standardize it?
Yes, I think we should.
Well, no, because that would destroy all that pattern matching. That's the only way to use it right now.
Well, I mean, yeah, not until we have.
Okay, I understand. Okay, but all right. So we've got the basic feature of these things is they have a payload at that node.
That's just a tag. That's not the payload.
That's attributes. That's.
No, I understand. This thing here, I know that's the
the subtrees is the meat of it. Like this is if you had like a link. Tag would be A, the attribute would be href, and then the actual body of it would be subtrees.
Yes.
This were like HTML.
Yep.
And this should represent the DOM tree.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the basic point is there's a what this node corresponds to, there's an attributes, and there's the subtrees. And here, there's not really I mean, we could have something, and I'm now a little bit confused by this. Oh boy.
I think because you called everything text element, there is no tag.
No, I understand. But the point is that, the tag here would be noun phrase for that outer thing. But in fact, we're putting the nature of the grammatical unit in that association. So, I mean, one of the things that is not the case with Ian's trees at this time is they don't routinely have a standard for dealing with sort of attributes of this type, right? They
we usually call it annotations, right? We had to change name from properties and attributes to annotations. Remember?
Yeah, but that's
you pushed
I
it.
understand. I did push it. Yes. But okay, but we don't have annotations in trees right now, do we?
Correct. We don't.
Right. But so in other things, this idea that we have an annotation list is a thing in graphs and other places. Right. So in a graph, for example, just so we understand, in a graph, I mean, remind me how I annotate a graph if I were to just type in a graph. So let's say I have a graph and I've got, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 1, for example.
So you can use wrappers around them to just attach them.
So I can just say annotation there.
Yeah.
And then I say something like, I don't know, color arrow red or something. Right?
Yeah.
And I don't see that.
But sorry.
And I don't see it unless I say edge. What do I say? Edge style arrow annotation. What do I do?
Well, I mean, there should be an easier way to call on annotations there. Annotations in graph include things like style. We've used style as an annotation, actually. It's just, so there's both vertices and edges can have annotations, and style in both cases are standard, what we call standard annotations. that we
Okay,
support.
so you're telling me if I say style, and what do I do here in quotes?
No, style instead of annotation.
Oh.
Annotation is when you want total flexibility in naming what the heck they are.
Okay. All right. So then we've got
right now, but if we look at the input form, right, then presumably we see that this is somehow, removed from there. Right.
And do input form of out of 3 to see how non-standard annotations get stored. Right, it uses this annotation rules.
On that edge, because it is canonically labeling the edge by virtue of having those.
Right, which is very parallel, right? Edge style, it says that particular edge has the color red. If you read through the rule of the right-hand side of the edge styles there.
Right, sorry, where am I going to put this? I'm going to put this in maybe SW Notes 10. Okay, all right, so let's go back over here. Okay, now we've got the notebook case. Boy. The notebook case has yet another thing, which is it has, we could have had this in text element and so on. It has this cell and cell group data and notebook.
Yeah, and also
and of course that goes arbitrarily deep, right? Eventually you'll have a box data and then a row box and a superscript box and a template box, right?
Well, I understand that eventually it just goes into the expression, but the point is there's a superstructure that we're thinking of being the kind of the superstructure tree, which has expressions hanging off it, which themselves are trees.
I wouldn't think of it that way, at least not necessarily. Just like, if I have a syntax tree, right, I might have individual expressions that I go into, but they're all part of the same tree. Right? The addend in +2 is still part of my abstract syntax tree. So I
think it's also the case that there are more than one tree for the same object. So for instance, in compilation, you often have basic blocks as a node, and that's just a bunch of statements. You know what I'm saying? And you focus on the branching to, and it's how much you want to aggregate, I think depends on the kind of processing that you want to do. In the case of XML, I think it's easier in some ways, at least. Because it seems to me that everybody wants the DOM tree.
The thing that I'm confused by, for the last 35 years, we've had great success with expressions that have essentially a very simple tree structure. And, we have a few standardized things like options that hang off the expression. But what's happening here is we've got multiple annotated tree structures, some of which we're thinking of as being, in other words, we don't have a standard way to annotate. Is what's being asked for here a standard way to annotate our traditional expression tree structure? Or is this something different?
So tree objects are like nested associations and lists, but where you have tagged nodes because you can have a data.
I actually wrote before in the early 90s, something I call annotated expressions. They were like our, this before I was at the company, but in C code, where you have basically our expression structure plus annotations, because I was writing compilers, and that's what you do. You walk up and down those trees, accumulating information.
Right. So the basic question is how to annotate a generic expression.
I suppose it depends on what you mean by expression, right? So for example, the abstract syntax tree and the notebook, right? They need to be representations of text or of things that users typed in that may or may not actually correspond to a Wolfram language expression, right? People can type in things with syntax errors in them, and the abstract syntax tree and the notebook still need to be able to represent those things, whether or not, even though Shift Enter will, not do anything particularly useful, or at least of limited utility when you do that.
Okay,
but also here, how we map it to a tree depends on how we want to process it. So I think it's important to write a few prototypes that show that, there's going to be trade-offs. Because you want to be able to access and add to those annotations as you process it.
All right, but so, for example, with the compiler recently, we've ended up with these two different constructs, typed, and what are we calling it? Type, what is the thing that...
Type hint, I think.
Okay, type hint. Okay,
I have not heard of this thing.
Okay, so
I guess this must be recent.
It's recent, yeah. So typed is a totally inert thing that you can manipulate. You can have giant typed expressions. You can do transformations on them, etc. Type hint is something that can appear in compiled code, but which, were that compiled code to be run at top level, the type hint would just evaporate away. But were the compiled code to be actually run in the compiler, the type hint would cause the compiler to do something special. Right, so that's in terms of the annotation, that's two different kinds of annotations, one of which is an evaporating annotation, the other of which is a static annotation, that in order to do an operation, I don't know whether we have any mechanism to like clean the types out of things. In other words, we could imagine a thing that says, ignoring types, expa.
I think this difference though comes from the fact that, there are two different environments which code is run in the context of the compiler. So all the type hint is just saying that there's, it's handled differently in the two environments as opposed to typed that kind of isn't. But
yes,
but here everything is just evaluated.
But okay, so does type hint can only be used in held code? Because
yes, otherwise it just goes away.
Right.
So it's used in input. It's used as a typical piece of input. If you say function compiler, blah, 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 it's used there.
Right. And typed is used. I'm not sure I agree with Christopher's description, right? Because typed, it appears in the declaration of capital function. But, if you were to evaluate that function outside of the compiler, it would just be ignored, right? It's only... Meaning, ideally, right? We've had bugs with things that try to manipulate function and forget and aren't aware of this. But if function evaluates, it just throws that away as part of normal evaluation.
Right. So this was the distinction that we ended up making. So basically, right now, as in before like a week ago, when type hint was sort of implemented or whatever. The way it worked was that typed did two things. One was the thing in the declarations, but it also was the thing that would appear in code that would tell you that, oh, by the way, this thing that's a list, that's a packed array versus a whatever else. But now the idea is that those are done separately. So now typed is only going to be used in declarations.
All right, so let's keep going here. I just want to go down the other cases here.
Go down the tree.
Yes, indeed. So this is Brenton's abstract syntax tree, correct?
Yeah.
Well, this is a concrete. But yeah.
Well, it's the abstract syntax tree of that particular string.
Yes.
Well, no, it's the concrete syntax tree of that string, not the abstract syntax.
Yeah, people are Ian. It's okay. People are really bad about saying sticking.
What's the difference? I'm sorry. What's the difference?
Well, concrete is a lossless representation of you could consider white space and comments and the plus sign that you entered and everything. Okay. But
whereas the abstract syntax tree is just the semantics, supposedly.
Well, for us, it's very convenient. I can just say, think of the full form, and that is what the abstract syntax is. You wouldn't be able to say that in many other languages, but But yeah, that's us.
Well, that's because we're a symbolic language. Fancy that.
Yeah.
Okay, code element. This is Chris Cooley's work, and looks rather clean. And this is very similar to the source. You've got a source range. I don't quite understand why you have why do you have those two?
Well, it's line column.
Yeah, mine's character position.
Okay. Fine.
Which, if you gave an option to my concrete parse, it could also give the character position. But yeah, it could give the same output as that.
Okay, I just a small design point. I mean, I think we really need something where, if we are going to represent in terms of line and column, we need a way. I mean, like for example, we should have a line column way of accessing text. So in other words, if I wanted to extract, if I wanted to get that 1516, right? This is just string manipulation stuff. We don't have a good representation for.
That's a good point. You mean like if you did string, a way of saying in string cases?
Yeah, exactly. Or string.
Wow, that'd be extremely nice, and I would use it, and that would be yeah. I would advocate for that.
Right. So I mean, what we need is. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I was just thinking right now. I mean, that would be some string split on on line breaks, and then you do part by the row, and then you do string take by or string part by the column, right?
We could almost call it card. Never mind. We're not going to call it card. Anything to do with cards. I'm joking. Right. I mean, sorry, that was.
I don't get the joke, but that's okay, I guess.
Oh gosh, everybody's too young for this joke.
I'm a punch card reference.
Punch card.
Punch cards. I've seen those.
Anyway, no, but I mean, what this wants to be, because I mean, it would also be useful to have a symbolic representation from get, for example, when it gives syntax errors. If it knows, I mean, we should have a way of representing a line number in a file and a line and column. Line column plus a span of those.
Yeah.
Of course, then you get into the question of, do you want a linear span or a rectangular span?
Well, you mean?
I mean, I guess in this context, you really want the linear span, right? But of course, Emacs gives you both concepts, right? You have the linear, right? Given a line number, two positions in the file, you can talk about either that linear stretch of characters or the rectangle defined by those 2 points.
But it's not even. It's not a rectangle, though. Either.
That's ragged.
Yeah.
Well, it's potentially ragged, yes, but it's incredibly useful when you're when you have well formatted code and you're trying to do certain.
Anyway, this is a separate. Let's take this to ILD maybe for discussion. This line column string manipulation thing. Minor point. Let's go back to looking at this. So what Chris has here is code element token, and then you've got the actual word, the actual text, which, boy, we have so many different ways to do this. I mean, there we've got the actual text again in a cell, right? And then
Which you
then
think
what
of as a leaf. It's a leaf.
But
container.
look here, there's
Right.
different heads in the notebook, right? And remember, XML didn't have that. They had to store the varieties of heads as a tag.
which is the tag.
Right.
Right.
And same thing for that Cooley thing. He says code element, and then it has to, or code element token, and then it has to have a tag,
exactly.
main,
Right.
or whatever.
Right. So I mean, the modalities are either we have multiple heads, e.g. cell versus cell group data, or we have tags as first element. e.g., now what does text element do again? Oh, for goodness sake. Text element does neither of those.
Yes.
Or
Thank
the
you for
third
saying
thing.
tags as first element. I vote for that. Yes.
Or in the case of no tagging, i.e. single, all nodes the same, which is the case, e.g. text element, right? And I believe that case is also the case for, a generic expression.
I have to say that I find text element weird. I mean, maybe it's just because I haven't thought about this very deeply, but it seems to me strange, right? All of these have singleton associations. So why isn't the right-hand side a tag of, the basic structure? And maybe you need additional information that could go in an association or list of rules. But it seems to me like the grammatical unit is something you basically have to have. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's why you're wrong. That's the problem. That's why we had to do it this way. You don't have to have a grammatical unit, because you can have pure text that is identified with text elements, but where you don't know, I'm trying to remember how this worked, where you don't know whether it's an adjective or not, right? And in addition, there's many other things you could tag here, and maybe text structure even shows some of that other tagging.
The association is actually optional in text element.
And so what does a singleton text element mean?
Just
it
a
means
list
an unknown. It means it's a thing where it's an unknown. If I say text element of foo, I get nothing. That's odd. Well, maybe if I do this, what happens? That's even more bizarre.
So apparently you do need to have a grammatical unit, at least
right.
if you use the two-argument form.
Copy a valid text element from somewhere. Just pick a text element.
Okay, well, what's the difference in this one here? I got a valid text element there.
Okay, now do text element of list of that twice. Right.
Oh, that's
there's no grammatical unit associated with that. It's just like a forest of text.
It's a forest of trees, which in fact that's actually a sentence marker. That's very bizarre. I'm not sure the text element is the right thing. Okay, but so so we've got, first of all, we've got this thing here is, basically type tagging. That's the first thing. And then we've got attributes is another aspect of these things. And we've got the payload. Everybody has a payload, and the payloads work more or less the same in all cases. Although the payloads might be named payloads, like an association of subtrees or a list of subtrees. Do you agree so far?
With the type tagging, with those three things that you have listed right there, are those exclusive?
Well, no, I'm just, this is natural history.
Okay.
I'm just saying what we have right now. Okay, so with attributes, what do we have? How do we do attributes? What are the ways we do attributes? So in the case,
is a list of rules.
Presumably it predated association, right?
Well, but mostly, I mean, the thing is, we've got this complete zoo of what the order of the tag versus the attributes versus whatever else. See, I'm just wondering. Okay, let's discuss what we do in trees now. In tree, the only thing we're doing differently here is we don't have type tagging as such. Well, what we have in a tree is we have payload followed by subtrees, right? But we don't have any standardization of payload.
Exactly.
See, if we standardized payload into tag and attributes, let's just imagine, just for the sake of argument, that we had a wrapper called payload. Okay, I'm not saying it's necessarily a good name, and that it was standardized into tag and attributes. Would we then have a convenient way to put all of these different tree types into all these different tree-like things into a generic tree structure?
Almost. Cell has a third thing, which is a sequence of styles.
Okay, so that's a special case of attributes.
Well, what I was going to
It's like
with
the
cell
novel
styles,
type of
I was assuming that was type tagging. That like I would think of cell styles as type tagging myself. You know,
No, but we don't, because
it's not
we
a single tag, though, is the point that I'm making.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. You can have multiple cells even, or styles even. Yeah.
No. The problem is that what
Or none.
what Ian is pointing out is that you both have cell and you have title. You see, they're both taggy type things.
Sure, but one is more right. It's a particular instant, right? I mean, cell has very definite meaning of, what its, remit is, and then you can have different types of cells. Right?
I know, but my point is, if we were going to standardize on payload here,
oh, I see,
we
wouldn't have a place to put the cell name.
If anything, there's actually another modality in that list of different heads, even cell.
Well, it's the multiple heads. That's this case here.
Well, but if that's not its own item, I mean.
No, I know, but the thing we're trying to do,
we're
trying to take all these different tree types, and we're trying to figure out how do we map them into Ian's trees. Okay? And the whole point is Ian's trees have this form, payload subtrees. And so what I'm arguing is the way we do it is we standardize the structure of the payload piece. Ian, does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to other people here?
Yeah, I have two proposals. One is to somehow try to use annotations, and the other is basically this, come up with symbolic representations for the payload.
Okay. What's the annotation idea?
Can you scroll down in the agenda notebook? Well, maybe we should actually look at how things are represented as trees.
In my world, I'm thinking of attributes are annotations. In fact, I wanted to call them attributes, but we use attributes for something not so useful, since a long time. Can't really change
useful,
that.
Yeah, right. Anyway. Okay.
One question, sorry. So payload would be something that you can have in the first argument, not something that you need to have.
That is correct. It will be the standardized way of translating an XML tree into an Ian tree, so to speak.
Yes, but we are not forced to have a payload object in every tree.
That is correct. You can just have, it's just like you're not forced to have in an expression, you're not forced to use list or something. You're not forced to, expressions can have all kinds of wacky forms.
Ian's trees can have XML and C mixed. It can be a very hybrid tree. We graphed C code onto XML.
Yeah, in principle. Right, I mean, and okay, let's take
where the idea of like a schema comes in, so you can specify like a well-formed tree for a certain type.
Right, okay, so there's a different issue here, which is the schemas and WUFTs, well-formed trees. Okay, let's look at your.
So I'm still trying to understand exactly what payload is, right? Because I have cell of, my title, comma title, and font size goes to 72. And so where does my title go in the tree? And
we're not sure.
Font size goes to 72.
Font size goes to 72 as part of the attributes.
Okay.
So attributes is strictly like key value type things. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the idea. And the idea is that the schema will basically say, for example, the schema might say payload of, tag 1 or tag 2, and then this would be like options pattern or something. Maybe not that, but something like that. That's the schema. I'm not sure that's right, but let's look at Ian's stuff here. Okay, so I'm sorry, I had to explain this. How would it work?
Open that section above prose.
Okay, it's not horrible.
So this is it's kind of following how annotation rules works in graph.
Wait a minute, how does this case work? How does this case work with the pure subtrees here? How is this not ambiguous? Or is it not ambiguous already? Tree has options as a third.
Tree has an optional first argument.
Okay, and subtrees is always a list or an association.
Or the symbol none, yeah.
And this isn't ambiguous?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so this is adding in all the sort of data. So XML. Okay.
I'm not sure how it's not ambiguous, but we can postpone that conversation.
Okay. I don't understand this one. So trees, text, sorry, at the end, there's a thing where the subtrees is where instead you have a text comma none.
Yes.
So
the leaves there would be tree of a string, comma none.
Okay.
With some annotation rules, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
Well, yes, definitely, because they're going to say what the grammatical unit type is. Okay, so that's proposal number 1. And
so one of the benefits of this is that there's like a distinguished, this is all kind of data, right? But the idea is to have a preferred thing that's the actual data of the tree, and the rest is split off and considered metadata somehow.
Yeah, but I mean, look, for example, in notebook import, okay, it's really important that we be able to say, get me all the title cells. And that's pretty obscure here. I mean, that pattern is going to be a messy pattern. We could provide some helper functions. Do we have annotation matching type stuff for graphs?
I was thinking that, here, the value of these proposals is going to strongly depend on how you use it to process. Like, how easy is it to access the values of some of those annotations? And if we just have to use the pattern language, it's kind of clumsy. I mean, it's possible, but it's a little clumsy.
Yeah. I mean, we need utility functions to do that. We need something like the options pattern mechanism to deal with this.
Yeah, something like
annotations pattern or something.
Yeah.
Which is not impossible. I mean, the options pattern stuff, I would say, is modestly successful. Right? Because we've got to be able to extract, like, for example, I want to find all elements of a tree that are title cells. Right? How do I do that? Guys?
Yeah, I think that needs to be easy.
It's really not clear to me how you would do it with this form. There's annotation value, but the problem with annotation value is it's a function that takes the object as one of its arguments.
Right. Okay.
You have to like
Right,
pass
but
the
we,
thing
but
in.
but I mean, isn't it just right? You look for, you know, you just stick a key value pattern in the third argument with, you know, self style goes to title.
Well,
Right,
no,
if
it's more complicated than that because it's got multiple styles here.
doesn't matter. That's what key value pattern does. Oh, but this is style goes to,
There's even an
right.
association.
Doesn't matter. Key value pattern accepts lists of rules.
Okay.
Right. So instead of styles goes to title, it'll be styles goes to blank / semi, you know, member queue.
Yeah, that's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. I've actually forgotten how key value pattern works. Okay. I'd forgotten how this worked. This is pretty nice. When did we introduce this? Oh my gosh. We introduced it that long ago?
Yep.
Wow.
Right. We did the first round of pattern matching for association in 10.2, and this was sort of the second round.
Was that the last round? Or I thought we did more pattern matching and associations more recently. Wasn't pattern matching and associations a trailing issue for a while?
I think it was a trailing issue until a key value pattern was introduced, at least as far as I was aware.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean there are some issues, but I don't think there's been sort of any sort of major.
Gosh, time goes so quickly. The association was 2014. My gosh, I thought it was much newer than that. Well, good. I'm glad it's that old. Okay. All right, let's look at the symbolic data idea. This is your other idea.
Yeah, so the symbolic representations that we already have, like notebook and text element and XML element, they somehow represent the entire tree, including its subtrees. So the idea here is to make parallel versions of those, but that represent just the payload.
Oh boy.
And then they can be all specialized for their different use cases.
Does this help with pattern matching?
Yeah, one benefit of this is that you could just do tree cases on this. Like there's no metadata, it's just data.
I
You don't need
understand. This is similar to the payload idea. This is a specialized payload idea.
Mm-hmm.
So we could, in general, have an arbitrary payload, and then we could have specialized cases of particular wrapper node wrappers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, gosh, you know what I think. Go ahead.
So you're saying that data. Oh, I see. That's both the pro and the con. But why are you claiming that data and metadata are combined? You're claiming that style is data, not metadata.
Yeah, this makes
in the first argument.
Data and metadata. You know.
What's that?
This makes no attempt to distinguish between data and metadata. Just have one object representing all of it. Like a cell node represents the styles and the options.
And
yeah, I suppose it depends on your point of view whether style is data or metadata. But right, because I think of the first argument as the data and style as the metadata. I mean, it's very important metadata.
Well, the first argument of cell is a subtree in this. Like if you look up to how notebook gets converted into a tree, like up in the agenda notebook.
The fact that we don't agree on what data metadata is means that it's a good thing to have them together.
Yes, I agree.
So you see cells that don't have a cell group data always just have a leaf that's the boxes in that cell. And you can see that with a tooltip.
Okay. All right. Let's come back down here. I mean, introducing a modest number of new symbols to represent these nodes doesn't seem crazy to me, if they can be given, nice functionality. I think there needs to be a generic one. This idea here seems pretty awkward in terms of our standard pattern matching modalities.
I agree. And it would also need some kind of supplied type mechanism to be able to have functions operate on the tree and pull in.
So why wouldn't right? So why wouldn't your other idea still require you still to write something like, cell nodes of x blank blank comma options pattern / semi, or x blank blank string comma options pattern / semi member queue title of the list.
Well, I think it depends on how.
My view is it's not. They're both kind of like equivalent in terms of pattern matching, but the problem is, how do you even access the data? If it's all in the data, we already have a way to access the data.
I see.
What do you mean by that, Ian?
So like functions like tree data, return the data, functions like tree map, apply a function to the data. What would be the equivalent if you wanted to map a function over a tree and have the function apply to these annotation rules?
Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. No, I agree. That's a good argument for the fact that there is a tree map that can pick up the whole payload at that node and do something with it seems like a relevant argument.
Another advantage is that we could have special type setting for each of these things, and it would work even outside the tree framework.
Yes, like the XML node could typeset as a piece of XML.
Exactly.
Okay. You didn't. Okay, I mean, there's clearly some cleanup that's going to be needed. Like this, there's way too many pieces here, and that needs to be thought through, and so on. You didn't include Chris's. What does this have? It has code element and code element token, and that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I mean, there will be other node names for code element.
Yeah, there could be like a code node that has a type and the source.
Okay, so where are we going from this? And we're running out of time here. Okay, to me, it seems like proposal number 2, together with a generic payload wrapper, seems like the more promising direction. However, I strongly think we need to figure out there are going to be some utility functions for pattern matching, and there also is going to be sort of the XSLT style, tree sampling, both doable with a pure sort of kind of tree. What am I saying?
Should work for arbitrary trees as well as specialized trees.
Yes. Okay. All right. So then, right. I mean, we need to understand. I don't really understand. Do you understand how XSLT type or XPath and so on stuff? I mean, you have the equivalent of XPath. Nice.
Yeah, we have a design for XPath.
And how would that relate to any of these? I mean, the one thing that's good about this, about the second thing, is that, the path just goes and drills into the subtrees. And there's one thing that is the actual payload at that node. And you're not trying to pick up two different things with an annotation as well as a whatever. Right?
So kind of the idea of XPath is combining information about the position with basically pattern matching. It's like a hybrid pattern position spec.
Okay. Well, again, that's probably not, we may have to have some utility thing to pick out the, the options part of this.
But that's what I think, regardless of the representation, that's what we would want, even for the first case, to, just be able to pick out the values,
Sure.
There.
Look, I suspect, okay, let's combine, okay, my guess is that the generic payload case can be done with something like the annotations mechanism. Is there a wrapper? Before you get to annotation rules, is there something I'm now forgetting? Is there a pure annotation? Yes, there is. That's what we were showing before in this case here. This annotation wrapper almost becomes an annotated node or something as the generic for the payload. Does that make any sense to anybody?
For the key value type annotations, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, but what that would be is you could have specifically a cell node or something, or you could just have a generic annotated node. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's right. Okay. Well, what's this? Oh. Okay, what else should we make sure to cover right now?
So you think this direction of having these node?
That's what I think is the best.
Is node a good convention for the name?
Okay. Could be. Anybody else got a comment about that? I mean, we're calling it vertices in a graph, but I think that means, node is free for this concept. Any thoughts? Anybody? Christopher, Itai, anybody? Your thoughts?
I like node.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Or what about this general direction? I think this general direction is the right one, because I like the idea of independent formatting for nodes, star node objects. I have a feeling we might end up changing, well, for XML, the question of the default import for XML, might get changed. Text structure might change in terms of its default return object. Notebooks, I mean, or alternatively, many of these things could just, if you say tree of them, that's when they turn into this kind of form.
Yeah, I would argue there always needs to be a way of seeing the flat, the existing way of, you see the notebooks and the things above, to be able to construct, to do pattern matching on, for you to be able to write that and see what's going on as a, flat text, almost flat text, way. There should always be a way of getting what currently is the current behavior.
Well, in which cases, I mean, in the case of notebooks, maybe. I mean, it's pretty inconvenient. Honestly,
well, but what I mean, but we have with double and triple clicking for, here in the front end, like it's extremely convenient to be able to dig down and see like what the, what tree structures are, to be able to write up patterns, to do pattern matching.
Listen, I argue this is basically unreadable. And it probably helps that we've got I mean, look at that thing.
It's unreadable, but it's what you need to see if you were writing patterns to do pattern matching.
I understand, but I'd like to argue that if this is better formatted.
Right. Maybe it can still, all the characters can be there, but there can at least be some line breaks or something in there.
That would be uncontroversial. Yes. Yeah.
What would happen? Just so I understand, Brenton, how do I format this with your line breaker?
Oh, it would need to be, I think it has to be an input, just convert it to an input cell first. I don't think it does output.
How do I do all of this?
A cell convert to, right?
Or no.
You want
just format.
Yeah, you just want to command 9 it, right, to turn it into
command
an
9.
input.
Okay. Now what?
Yeah, and then right click somewhere in the cell. I can't remember if we added a menu. Like in notebooks, if we added that. See, it's in the package editor, but I don't know if it's in regular notebooks.
We are losing here, my friend. Come on.
You can do it in the package editor.
I've seen the button.
What happened? What happens?
Format or cell.
Okay, so you're telling me if I go here.
Yeah, and then just format cell that's in the toolbar there.
You need to have the cell selected.
Oh, it's still not. It's still output. There's still an output label. I don't know if it's.
No, it's not. That output label I think is relevant.
Oh yeah. Fine.
Actually, that's a bug that got moved over there. Okay, I'm not. This is not making it for me.
Well, no, yeah, that's the format. That's what it looks like. Yep.
You might be a little bit confused because the whole thing is there's this XML object of document around all of it.
Well, I would not say this was a banner moment for this formatter.
Out of curiosity, could you try taking it out of that outer wrapper?
Yeah. How do I do that? I just
well, maybe get rid of the airiness, but
the formatter has a lot of room for improvement.
Oops, maybe that. Okay, now what? So now let's de-aerify it. Make it less.
Maybe it's not syntax anymore.
Okay.
It's very hard to tell.
Yeah, what you have is not syntax cue, right? See the red comma?
It starts with a curly brace and it ends with a square bracket, which is suspicious.
Which you will notice the formatter is not complaining about.
Right, maybe just delete from the comma upwards.
And just get rid of the declaration as well.
You can just triple click on one of the XML elements that looks like it's the outermost one, and then just copy that. Otherwise, I think we're just going to be. Are you sure that that's an expression?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's something weird.
It's not going to look much different.
Input cell, by the way, because there's something weird about this.
This is really looking terrible. I'm sorry.
Is this terrible? Is this because...
Can you try this though? Instead of copying the cell in, can you just do this? Go back to the notebook. Okay, triple click on one of the XML elements, copy that, then paste into a new cell in here. Okay, now it's not an input cell. It's actually the right kind of cell.
I mean, it's going to look the same.
Now
Okay.
what do I do?
Well, click it and
press format cell, don't you? Okay. Now reduce the airiness.
I mean,
No,
it's just the same. I mean, yeah.
Okay, fine.
Well. It didn't work. I mean,
this looks like it worked better than what we saw before, but that might
only
be
a bit.
copied out.
I mean, look, basically this is a good example, Brenton, of a bad example of how the airiness is working, because this should be able to aggregate these things onto the same line without crunching everything up.
Well, I mean,
personally, I would like for a mode where the comma was on the same line rather than on its own line.
But these XML elements could be turned. What should happen is these should be on their own line. but these separate XML elements should be on different lines.
I mean, look, it's not that we are bereft of things that we know need improvement. We're bereft of the time and priority to funnel into this at the moment when compared to other stuff in Brenton's queue.
Yeah, right. I just want to make one comment about something that I noticed. Okay. If I type X close bracket, no, that's not the case. What is the freaking case? There's some case where you don't get. Oh yeah, if I add, wait a minute.
So, but I think that, question is where you want to get. And what I hope that we can get to is that, two use cases are super common. One is I want to extract some information out of this tree. It should be easy to extract. Two, I want to transform this tree in some way, maybe pick out the subtree, maybe use some other elements to construct a new tree. That should also be possible. That's transform is wide open, meaning that there are many.
I don't know what the typical, so typically you ingest a tree. It's what we do with expressions all the time. We ingest an expression, it matches some pattern. We use the pattern variables to pick out pieces of the expression that were matched.
Yeah.
And we return a transformed version.
Yeah.
And that works really well. So
right.
The question is what the tree analog of that is.
Right.
Exactly.
So for trees, what we have now is basically the standard functions for working with positions and levels. So you can do, tree position, tree extract, tree replace part, tree insert. But what we don't have yet in the trees project is like pattern matching and transformation.
Right. Pattern matching based on content as opposed to replace part, which is based on part location. We don't have content-based pattern transformations.
Right.
We only have position-based transformations.
So it's a little bit like adding a while loop. We have the for loop, and we want to add the while loop. Data dependent looping.
Okay.
As opposed to fixed.
I thought for loops had their condition depended on. Well, whatever.
Right.
Okay.
So I wonder if it would be interesting to in the tree view, like you have at the bottom there, to be able to have some way to to pick a node and be able to do something with it interactively, get its
location.
Get its location, maybe copy the entire expression as a whole. Or
okay, so that's a good idea.
The other thing, I think it's very important to abstract information. So like not showing the attributes.
Sure, that's a elision of the tree. But the thing John is mentioning, which
it's great.
In SMP, I hate to say it, in a pretty printed expression, one could right-click something. Well, it wasn't right-click in those days. It was some kind of term cap, something or other thing. But in modern times, it will be one could right-click and get the part number, which is something we've never been able to do. We should be able to do that. And presumably with Brenton's new parser technology, we would be able to do that. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, but getting the part number isn't hard though.
Well, John, how would we?
Well, so it might be more than the part number that you want. You might also want to, snapshot the node or the entire subtree.
I know that.
Like copy paste it.
Expression.
Sort of thing.
If I want to know that particular, element there, I would love to have something here that says part number, copy part number.
Well, something like that one in particular is a very hard one because it's the key of an association.
Okay.
So there's no input to part that can get it. But by the way, just in reference, the data set does support this.
Yes, it
in
does.
the limited case of list and associations.
Yes, I know.
And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think you want something where, from arbitrary expressions is a bit worrisome because of exactly the sort of thing that Christopher's raising. But from something that,
that's
is
still
a
the first
structured
argument
view.
I mean, that's still the first part of that association, though, syntactically.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but
yes.
I mean, if you, you have, A space B plus C, and you point to B, did you want the part of B, the part of A times B, or the part of A times B plus C?
No. I'm saying, well, as I remember the way this worked in SMP, I hate to bring that back. It just went to the top level of the REPL. It just said, what is the part number relative to the top level output line?
Well, I think the problem is I think it would refer to the smallest atom.
Yes, the thing you selected.
Yeah. Well, the thing you selected is different from the smallest atom, but yeah.
Oh, you mean if you have a selection that spans multiple atoms?
Well, I think the question was, okay, right. So it seems like there are two cases. There's a case you right click basically on like a cursor position. Like, you've just selected A in the expression A plus B times C. Versus you've selected A plus B in the expression A plus B times C. But in that latter case, of course, you're in trouble because A plus B is not.
Yeah, it's not a subtree.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just saying, so in that case, it just says, sorry, I can't do it, or it gives you a forest result with multiple subtree pieces. Anyway, can we add that to a user assistance discussion, please?
Yeah. But, I mean, my general point is that I think, the notion of, going straight down to an atom is not, it's not necessarily what people are looking for.
Your point is, in the actual visual representation of a tree.
Yes.
That just like, I mean, I think that makes very good sense, that there's a right click here.
Yeah, and this is highly structured. I mean, you're never going to get, accidentally you'll get the, the part number of the second element of source range or something like that because you clicked in a silly place. It's always the node that you want.
No, I think you're absolutely right about this. I think that, look, I think things that you need here are, get me the part number. I think you need to be able to multi-click on this thing and close up that subtree so that it is an elided subtree.
Can you do tree outline of that tree?
Yes. You see, I think tree outline.
This still needs quite a bit of work, but the goal is to bring this closer to like how dataset has all this additional functionality.
Yeah, well, I think this is good. I think it needs a bit more framing and a bit more, chrome on it. By the way, you didn't include in your list of tree-like things the directory structure stuff from file system tree.
I don't think that's controversial. Like everything's just strings. They're not like structured payloads.
I think we should look at it in connection with these things. I think they're going to be. I think I don't agree with you. There's directories versus files. All kinds of. Maybe it's obvious, but it's not so obvious to me. And certainly in terms of this XPath stuff, I can imagine wanting to match. I don't even know. Well, I guess in like Unix or something, you can say /* and then a file name and so on, right? To match. In other words, you can match a path.
Yep.
And because it has a canonical delimiter for the path, and in this case here, the analog of that would be you're going down the tree and you're matching, well, insofar as the directory names correspond to the keys of associations that branch at different nodes and so on. Okay, in any case. All right, I agree. What else did you say, John? In addition to get me the path to that.
So
get me the subtree. Copy the subtree.
Yeah. Just copy the subtree as an expression.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So it's a tree expression, which because of the good design of tree itself, this is just a sub expression.
Yeah.
Right.
And there might be some way that you could copy the node, or that maybe there's some, I don't know enough about the tree design to say, but there might be something where you can get information about the node without the entire tree. Maybe
Well, you can
information that could
cauterize
be
the
used for
node.
pattern matching, for
Just
example.
cauterize the node, but by just removing its subtrees.
Yeah. So and that seems potentially useful if you're trying to build pattern matching code.
I agree. Those are very good ideas. Ian, I think it sounds like you need to work with somebody in the front end team to actually work on how this will actually work in the, in the formatted trees.
Yeah, the kind of stuff I'm talking about, it's work, but it's not insane to implement.
Do we want to have an attached cell type mechanism for trees?
Entirely possible. I mean, that would be a way that you could click or hover either way on something and have it sprout an interface that shows you kind of the metadata behind it and gives you some options of what to do with it. Something along those lines, I think, is certainly possible and potentially interesting.
Right. With respect to this, we probably should have a discussion about how to chrome it up. Unless you think you already know a path for that, Ian.
We need to follow up on that. Like, we had a meeting a while ago now. Noah was working on a new UX and design for tree outline. And
okay. Well, weren't we also working on some front end thingy?
Yeah, tree
or at
view.
least we talked about what was it called? Tree view, yes. Which would, I think, help in making these things a reality. But
is Noah still working with you guys?
I believe that's been inactive. Can check back in.
Okay. I mean, but if you're working with him again, I can talk to him about some of the concepts that we were mentioning here, just so he understands what sort of things to inject.
All right, this sounds good. Any last comments here?
So, as a practical question for 13.2, can you scroll back up to we have XML and text element and notebook. They're representing things like just with a list. Do we want to keep these things undocumented in 13.2 until we have these new?
I kind of think so. I kind of think we're not ready yet.
Okay.
I mean, we could maybe document them as experimental, but I think even that, I think they're a little bit too flaky.
Well, everything's experimental for trees.
Yeah, I think, what do other people think? I think it's a little too flaky. And I think people are going to start writing with this and then they're going to be upset because it all changes and so on.
Well, technically code freeze is like in an hour, so.
Right, so not going to happen.
I mean, this stuff was implemented in 13.1. It's just not been documented.
Right, well, so we have to get this design right. It's going to take some time to do that. So I would recommend keeping it undocumented for now. Mm-hmm. Okay, anything further here? Nope. Happy code freezing. See you guys later.
See ya.